Hello, my name is Zoe Eldredge. I created a graduation cap out of upcycled MCAT textbooks. So this is my finished product to start, so you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at to begin. So first of all, I was inspired when I was challenged to come up with an unconventional material. The first material that I really thought of was these expired MCAT books that I had bought in a bundle at a secondhand book sale at my library. I was already concerned about what to do with these textbooks because these books were from the mid 2000s and the MCAT has changed significantly since then. So I was really worried that I was just going to end up throwing them away. So they actually sat under my desk for about 9 months. So I was actually really excited for an opportunity to use these and recycle them, or upcycle them, I should say. So I wanted something that kind of went along with the theme of a textbook or an MCAT. So the first thing I thought of was a graduation gown. Now I realized that this actually would not work simply because I had no idea how to affix a zipper to paper. I thought that this was a great idea until I realized that I did not have the technical skills for this. But this graduation gown really did point me towards what I wanted to do, which was a graduation cap. So obviously, paper waste is a major issue in the United States. We've talked about this a little bit in our class. But according to Planet Blue, University of Michigan, about 30 million trees are cut down annually to create textbooks, which is just a travesty. But many textbooks over the last 30 years really have changed rapidly to the point where their information is simply obsolete. It's not usable. And even for exams like the MCAT and the LSAT, these preparation books are released on an annual basis, but every year they release a new version of the test, so you have to keep buying new books every year. So millions of books are literally just being discarded. And a lot of these old books are getting put into the landfill. They're not even able to be recycled. So we literally have 32 million books being discarded in the landfill each year. So I wanted to upcycle these expired MCAT books and keep them out of the landfill, but I wanted to be able to reference kind of what it would be like to just go buy a graduation cap. So the cheapest one you can find on Amazon currently is $9.99, while a custom one from Etsy is anywhere from $23 to over $100, depending on what it's actually made of. So suffice it to say, if you actually already own materials, it is pretty cheap to make your own graduation cap. So I actually had a piece of cardboard from a coconut water bottle box from Costco. So I was able to just pull this out and then trim it down a little, and this was actually the perfect size for a mortarboard or top of a graduation cap. I then ripped out about 10 pages from a physics and also an organic chemistry textbook. And some of these had some really cool molecules and different equation sheets. So I thought that these were the perfect fit for something that I wanted to look cool or interesting visually. So I then took these pages and I double-sided taped them and stuck them down onto the piece of cardboard. And I made it so the whole piece of cardboard was just one big collage on both sides. I then took also one physics equation chart that was beautiful. It was different shades of magenta, and I stuck it in the middle of the mortar board to create a focal point at the center. I then Mod Podged this whole thing down to help seal it together and to help prevent against water and sweat damage, because you might have your grandparents or your parents crying on you at graduation day because they're so proud of you, or you might get a little rain and you would hate to have a paper graduation cap just melt down your head. So I actually tried to prototype a tassel before I created the final product. And so I took just a smaller piece of paper that I had left over from creating the collage portion, and I cut little strips 3/4 of the way up the paper, and then I just kind of crumpled it and I rolled it and shaped it until I liked what I was seeing. So then I used my actual fabric tassel that I had used at graduation before, and I found the true measurements of a tassel. And then I was able to actually create the tassel portion and then the cord that you use to rotate the tassel around. So to create the cord, I took little pieces of paper that were the correct length, and then I braided them together. So it had increased stability, and it also just looked interesting. So if you haven't noticed, at the top of a graduation cap, there's always a button in the center, and that actually serves as your pivot point for your tassel when you're rotating it from right to left. So I needed to have something that was a working pivot point, which was actually something very difficult to come up with because you can't just tape the button down. It has to have a rotatable post to it. So I created a post by bending some staples, and I basically bent staples until I had one that I liked, and then I shoved it through the mortar board and I glued it onto the button that I had rolled up and created. And then I taped the end of the staple down onto the bottom of the mortar board, and then I taped this down and I Mod Podged it over with another piece of paper so that in case the staple came undone, it would not be snagging on anyone's hair or stabbing them in the head. I also had to create the base of the whole graduation cap, and I really wanted to make sure that this was stable enough because obviously this whole thing is pretty much made of paper. And so I thought, hey, weaving's pretty strong, I'll try that. So I prototyped a weaving portion, and I just eyeballed how big I thought it should be. Turns out it was way too small, and the weaving actually made it a lot more inconvenient than it needed to be. So from the prototype, I really realized that I needed to just measure my skull directly because I do have a particularly small head, and even a normal hat size probably wasn't the right reference for me. And then I realized that Mod Podge was going to be just enough stability that I really didn't need to add in weaving for the base of the cap. So then to just create the true base, I actually had my mom take a piece of paper and trace the top of my head. And then I cut out this piece of paper, and then I managed to cut strips of paper to fit this circumference and tape them together so that there were purple strips on the side and a big purple line down the middle. And then I cut this down even more until my mom and I said, hey, this looks like it's about the right height. So then with a hot glue gun, I created a little circle, and I then just squished it down onto it and let it dry. I then Mod Podged the base completely to provide that stability as well as a cohesive texture because this was a glossy Mod Podge, so I wanted to make sure that everything was nice and shiny and smooth looking. So that's our final product here. Pretty cool. Now, you're probably wondering, does it work? And the answer is yes, it absolutely does work. You can pivot the tassel. Another thing that's amazing about this is that you can actually twiddle with the button. It does fully rotate if you watch it move. And I can get my zoom to work. You can actually throw this thing. So at the end of a graduation, when you celebrate, you take it, you pick it up, and you throw it in the air. Well, if you were to do so, it does not dent. It actually is strong enough to withstand being thrown. So you could actually use this at a graduation. Now, my materials, I owned most of them before, thankfully. So really the only thing that I needed to buy was these textbooks, which I kind of already had anyways, and then some Mod Podge because I didn't have any. So this cost ended up being only $4.50 in total. However, I spent like 15 hours making this entire thing because I had to wait each time for the Mod Podge to dry. And so this was a really time-intensive item, and I also would not recommend doing this without a pattern and detailed instructions because I had to prototype a fair amount of it. So as you can see, I did have a big degree of change from the raw materials to the finished project because I literally made a graduation cap out of a piece of cardboard and some paper and like tape and glue. So that's a big degree of change in my book. And I also incorporated quite a few elements and principles of design within this creation. As you could probably have noticed, I have that vertical line on the base, I have horizontal lines on that big equation sheet that's the focal point, and I also have diagonal lines from the collage page placement. So the color scheme is an interesting topic because it is white, black, dark magenta, and light magenta. So if you sectioned those out, that's a monochromatic and achromatic color scheme kind of combined together. So if you took black and white and you looked at a color wheel, those are actually in the center of a color wheel. So if you were to line it up and trace a line, this is technically an analogous color scheme. I'm not completely sure what to call this, so it's somewhere between monochromatic, achromatic, and analogous. This texture for this design was smooth and glossy because of the Mod Podge, and then my button was a detail and my tassel was technically both a detail and a trimming. It wasn't really necessary, but it was definitely necessary for fun. Now, as for the principles of design, obviously we had that focal point that we created using the equation sheet on the top of the mortar board, as well as that button in the center. And that really draws your eyes in when you stand behind it and you look at it. Now, I truly believe that this graduation cap exhibited harmony because it has both unity with the matching colors and the different vertical lines and blocks on the band, as well as variety, where there's a lot of different molecules and a lot of different equations going on, especially in those white collage pieces with just the black lettering. There is a lot of variety when you look at it up close. So what did I learn about the creative process? I have to tell you that the creative process is long and it is not linear. This piece took me a long time to brainstorm, a long time to prototype and actually create. And I had to really have some grit to make it through because there were a couple of times where I sat there and I was like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever made. But then I also had to have the flexibility to say, hey, I'm going to move forward, I'm going to adapt, and I'm going to keep pushing forward. So I think that personally, humility is part of the creative process, and also recognizing that we're all human. Not everything you make is going to look perfect or be exactly like you want all of the time, but it's going to be good enough. And I think the ability to laugh at yourself when you're throwing a graduation cap made out of paper definitely helps. So thank you for listening, and these are my references if you wanted to read them.